New updates from the Russian front lines show that Ukraine's advances into the Kursk region have made progress. According to reports from the Institute for the Study of War, or ISW, Ukrainian forces pushing into the northeast have maintained a strong military presence in the Kursk region following the initial success of the offensive. This map shows a small region along the northern border, outlined in blue, where the Ukrainian military has carved out a region of land within Russia. The ISW has been tracking the progress of the offensive since early August. Meanwhile, in another development, the United Nations says Ukraine is breaking international law in the way it prosecutes people accused of collaborating with Russia. Since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, there have been about 1,800 convictions, ranging from leaking military secrets to simply justifying the invasion online. And the UN says that people are often wrongfully punished for legally carrying on with their lives under occupation. And staying with Ukraine, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz insists that his country will continue to be Ukraine's biggest supporter in Europe, following allegations of wavering support. Germany has been the second largest contributor of aid to Ukraine after the United States. But Germany's 2025 budget has been the subject of a protracted row between the three parties in Mr. Scholz's ruling coalition. Liberal Finance Minister Christian Lindner has asked other ministries to make savings to respect a constitutional rule that aims to prevent the state from taking on too much debt. The latest draft includes around 4 billion euros for Ukraine next year, compared with around 8 billion euros in 2024. Well, for his assessment, let's cross live to London and speak with Arise European Affairs analyst Dr. Marrick Lovich. Good to see you, Dr. Laskiewicz. What's the latest, first of all, that you're hearing about Ukraine's advance into the Kursk region, and does it support reports from the Institute for the Study of War in Washington that Ukrainian forces are pushing further inland?
Yes, broadly speaking, Ukraine is still able to push further inland because Russia has not actually put its major forces there. Their major forces are in Donetsk, and so Ukraine is making some further gains in its Kursk region, yes.
And you don't know how big sort of the advance is, because, I mean, last we heard there was some criticism of what some analysts called Ukraine's propaganda, when they kept saying that they were advancing, but kept giving the same amount of, if you like, coverage that they'd made into Russian territory, which is about 1,200 square kilometers. I mean, we're hearing the same thing over a 3-day period. And I wonder if that has actually changed now.
No, it is, as the journalists say, truth is the first casualty in a war. And in this war, everybody hypes themselves and tries to make out how much progress they've made. If you remember, in the Ukrainian counteroffensive, they also were saying how much forward they were going. I think what is true is Ukraine is making some advance. If I was going to, however, characterize it by one word, I would say it's marginal. The word advance carries with it a multitude of possibilities. One is just 100 meters, another is 100 miles. So all I'm saying is that it is clear Ukraine is making some progress. It is limited. It is not as big as it was. And therefore, roughly speaking, its territory remains, as a first analysis, the same. And in that respect, there is no actual contradiction between what they're saying and what's happening. However, it is quite true that in such a war, everybody does claim they're making huge advances when they're not. No.
Well, that assessment is good enough for me. And moving on, I mean, what are you hearing about allegations that German support is wavering for Ukraine? I mean, it seems as if they're cutting their funding to Ukraine by half going into 2025.
Quite right. The reason is quite simple. No one can afford this Ukrainian war. It's not just Germany, it's also the States. The States, it's deeply in debt. It's got huge debts. And so, incidentally, has Great Britain. How much more can they support what is going to sounds like a war without an end. It's incessant. Russia can certainly carry on, but whether any of the Western nations can is entirely questionable. Zelensky wants, of course, more and more. And the problem is that there isn't necessarily any more that these countries can give, assuming they can give what they can at present. And that is quite clearly Germany saying, no, it can't. It'll have to cut back. It has to be said also, Germany never was a great supporter of Ukraine. Unlike Poland, who gave unwavering support from the start, the Germans had mixed feelings about Ukrainian holding out. They had mixed feelings about supporting the war. It's true that in this year they have given some more aid, but to be honest, the implication was from the previous year that Germany would with pleasure go back to business as usual, that some sort of peace could be patched up, and that things could revert the way they were. They are not all that interested in this war. So in the sense that it's wavering, it never was all that strong to start off with.
And in another development, Dr. Laskiewicz, the UN is accusing Ukraine of breaking international law in the way it prosecutes people accused of collaborating with Russia. It says people are often wrongfully punished for legally carrying on their lives under occupation. I mean, what light can you shed on that?
This is quite true, but one can go further than that. You see, the whole problem is the Ukraine is presented, certainly in the West, as this democratic country against the bully boy Russia. But the central problem is it's not all that democratic. There haven't been elections. Any media which displeases the Ukrainians was closed down. Broadly speaking, it was at least not anti-Russian, and in that sufficed to have it closed down. And recently, please note, the Russian Orthodox Church will be banned. So these allegations by the UN that the Ukraine is falsely prosecuting fits entirely into this pattern, whereby you're dealing essentially with a state with its own view quite clearly of what is acceptable or not, which is all very well, but not really anything to do with democracy.
I mean, obviously, they're in a state of war. I mean, and if crimes are carried out in occupied territory, I mean, people need to be held accountable. But I suppose the UN is saying that there have been a number of instances where the law has been applied unfairly, including against people for carrying out acts which could have been compelled by the occupying authority. I mean, that sounds desperately unfair.
Yes. The point is that the Ukrainian mindset is quite clear. You must be at all times fully supportive of everything the Ukrainian state is doing and fully supportive of everything it says and wants to say. And as you rightly point out, the UN has said, no, I mean, the people might have been compelled. In any case, it's hard to see why some of the cases came to court at all, because you're entirely correct in stating that espionage or some sort of terrorist activity must be punished. That is quite clear. That is true of every state around the world. On the other hand, they seem to have got to the point where they're saying that if your views, which you may be compelled, of course, to make in that respect, but if your views don't fit in, you can be prosecuted. Well, as I repeat, this is not anything to do with democracy, and it certainly has gone a step too far.
Brilliant to talk with you, Dr. Laskiewicz. We always learn a whole lot more after these conversations. Dr. Marrick Laskiewicz is a RISE European Affairs analyst who was talking to me on the line from London.